Good morning, distinguished delegates. Distinguished delegates. Good morning, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to declare open this special sitting of the 107th session of the International Labour Conference and to welcome you all to the 2018 World of Work Summit, the theme of which is Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience. This morning's special sitting will begin with an interactive, high-level panel discussion on employment and decent work for peace and resilience. Then, following a short suspension of the sitting, His Excellency Mr. Michael Higgins, President of the Republic of Ireland, will address our Assembly. In the afternoon, the conference will be honoured by a second high-level guest, His Excellency Mr. Faustin Archange Touadéra, President of the Central African Republic. To begin this morning's proceedings, I would like to present our distinguished panelists. Mr. Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Mr. Elder de Costa, General Secretary of the G7+ group of countries with recent experience of conflict and fragility. Ms. Lucia Ljubic Lepin, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Permanent Representative of Bosnia and Herzegovina in Geneva. Ms. Rukia Traoré, Ambassador for the Fondation Passerelle from Mali. Ms. Silvia Escobar, President of the Terpel Corporation from Colombia. And Ms. Rosa Elena Flores Gonzalez, General Secretary of the CTC Trade Union Confederation in Colombia. I would also like to present our distinguished moderator, Ms. Carolina Robino, a journalist with 30 years of experience and the current director of BBC Mundo, who will shortly explain the structure of this morning's panel discussion. Before I give the floor to the Director General of the ILO, Mr. Guy Ryder, to lay the foundation of this year's World of Work Summit, I would first like to say a few words about this event. The central role of employment and decent work in addressing contemporary crisis situations has been prominent in recent times, especially in the context of recent refugee crises in many countries around the world. The importance of this issue led to the adoption in June 2017 of the Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience Recommendation, 2017 number 205. It is my hope that our panel discussion will help guide our efforts within the ILO and back in our respective countries so that we may be better equipped to continue working towards the achievement of social justice and lasting peace in today's complex world. I now invite the Director General of the ILO, Mr. Guy Ryder, to take the floor. Please go ahead, Mr. Ryder.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking all of you for being here and for participating in our World of Work Summit on employment and decent work for peace and resilience. I have to say, I don't remember seeing such a full room for our previous World of Work Summits, and I think it is testimony to the importance of the issues we will be considering. And indeed, we've chosen this theme for very obvious reasons. Our world is suffering not only heightened tensions, but also multiple grave and intractable conflict, as well as, of course, as natural disasters. Terrible events inflicting very great suffering, events which destroy lives and communities and which, taken in the aggregate, threaten our collective stability. The broadcast images that we all see, be they from battlefields in Syria or natural catastrophes such as the one that has struck Guatemala, must not inure us to the human costs that they involved. Rather, I believe they must move us to solidarity and to action. And that's why the ILO is and must be present in such situations, and we are here today because of the very straightforward demand of hundreds of millions of women and men living in fragile and conflict-affected countries and disaster situations. And the plea that we hear time and again is for jobs, for bread, for freedom and dignity, education for the children. And those who are displaced want to go home in safety, home to jobs and home to security. I've heard that message time and again in refugee camps. And all of this is why the ILO is engaged. That is why we are here. Indifference would be the most shameful reaction of all, and one that has no place in our organisation, in our tripartite constituency, and our collective mandate for social justice. And we all have a stake in securing peace and resilience, because deep and persistent crisis endangers us all. There are echoes of this in the ILO's constitution, which reminds us that poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. Disturbingly, I feel there are few signs of improvement in the near future. More countries are experiencing violent conflict than at any time in nearly 3 decades, and record numbers of people are on the move, displaced by violence, by war, or by persecution. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing, I think, the beginnings of the appearance of a new global consensus that building and sustaining peace requires addressing the root causes of conflict and crises, which lie in and are nurtured by conditions of poverty, exclusion, inequality, discrimination, and violations of human rights. And there is a convergence here between the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the UN Secretary General's Peace-Building and Sustaining Peace Agenda. And together, they create a momentum for inclusive growth, for employment generation and decent work, especially for young people as core components for conflict prevention, for post-conflict recovery, and for the sustaining of peace. And this link is, frankly, nothing new in our history. In the midst of global conflict, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, in his speech to the 1941 International Labour Conference, said, and I quote, that in the process of our working and fighting for victory, however, we must never forget the goal which is beyond victory. We must plan now for the better world that we aim to build, and in the planning of such international action, the International Labour Organization, with its representatives of labour and management, its technical knowledge and experience, will be an invaluable instrument for peace. Ladies and gentlemen, decent jobs are a part of that better world, a more peaceful world. And as President Santos of Colombia reminded us just last week, if you want peace, cultivate social justice. And over the years, the ILO has put its expertise and knowledge at the service of the most vulnerable populations in fragile and conflict-affected countries and in recovery from disasters. And we have done so through approaches derived very directly from the founding principles and values of our organisation. And last year, as you have recalled, Madam President, the conference adopted our updated recommendation 205 on employment and decent work for peace and resilience. It stands as a landmark instrument for the world of work in addressing concerns that are at the crossroads of humanitarian and of development assistance. Recommendation 205 provides guiding principles and policy guidelines to member states to respond better to conflict and to disaster. It calls for coherent and integrated strategies to prevent and to deal with crises, to facilitate post-conflict recovery, and to sustain peace and resilience. And I believe that we need together to seize the opportunities of the new humanitarian and development architecture for sustaining peace, to do more to respond to conflicts and more to prevent them from happening in the first place. That new agenda, ladies and gentlemen, calls for closer strategic and operational partnerships, which is why I particularly welcome the presence of High Commissioner Filippo Grandi and for the General Secretary of the G7+ amongst our distinguished panellists this morning. This objective of partnership and coherence in international effort in support of national governments and peoples was our objective when we launched our Jobs for Peace and Resilience flagship program at the ILO. It has a strong focus on youth and on women. It provides a multi-track approach based on social dialogue, which brings together relevant employment and local economic development actors in this coherent, comprehensive and context-specific manner in fragile and conflict-affected countries. Such initiatives, however, have to be part of a much larger endeavour for peace based on committed, inclusive, national ownership that integrates the needs of the most marginalised, including not just women and children and young people, but also minorities and people with disabilities. President, later today, as you have indicated, we will be honoured by the presence of two heads of state who will have much to tell us about conflict and the building of joint efforts to achieve recovery, stability and shared prosperity. But before that, we will benefit greatly from the perspectives of our expert panellists, who I again thank for their presence and welcome. We have the opportunity to engage with them in a dialogue which I believe will be both instructive and action-oriented, and I want to thank them, particularly them and everybody else who will participate in today's proceedings. So with no further ado, let me thank you all for being here. Let's look forward to a discussion which is going to take the ILO forward along a path which it has already begun to walk, but which it must walk to its full conclusion. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Director General. I now invite our distinguished panelists to take their seats on the podium so that we may begin our discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, I now give the floor to Ms. Robino so that we may begin our discussion. Ms. Robino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's my first time at the ILO. And I'm very pleased to moderate this panel in which we will discuss one of the issues at the very heart of the ILO, which is employment and jobs for peace and resilience. And first of all, before we start, I want to thank all of you to be here, obviously. This is a golden panel, and I hope we will have a fruitful discussion and learn from the experiences that all these people have in their different grounds. And before starting, I invite you all to see a video that has been prepared especially for the occasion.
Forcés de se réfugier dans des villes, des pays, loin de chez eux. Sans aucune idée du moment où ils pourraient retrouver leurs existences habituelles.
Crisis and conflict disrupt lives and livelihoods, aggravate poverty, and erode global security. The ILO has an important role to play in finding a solution for the 1.5 billion people affected by crisis and conflict around the world. Founded in 1919, honored with the Nobel Peace Prize in 1969, and right up to today, the International Labour Organization is closely connected with the global quest for peace. Last year, the ILC adopted Recommendation 205 on employment and decent work for peace and resilience, providing guidance on preventing and responding to crisis and conflict. The ILO flagship program, Jobs for Peace and Resilience, takes that guidance and translates it into a coherent, integrated strategy to help break the vicious cycle of fragility, violence, and poverty. By promoting employment and decent work, the flagship tackles a root cause of economic, social, and environmental vulnerability. It calls for country-specific strategies, combining employment-intensive investments and local economic development to meet labour market needs. Skills development and training to help prepare young people for the new skills needed as a result of crisis or disaster. Making employment services stronger, to build bridges between people seeking work and employment opportunities. Entrepreneurship training and business development strategies to promote sustainable enterprises and generate jobs. There are no simple answers to end conflict and crisis. However, commitment from all sides and support from the international community can create long-term solutions. There is a new global consensus to address the root causes of conflict. There is momentum for a growing role of the ILO in building peace. The Jobs for Peace and Resilience flagship program can put the ILO and its values at the center of the efforts to prevent and respond to crisis and conflict around the world.
Une maison, des habitudes, un futur. Tant d'espoir, tant d'espoir.
So, as many of you probably read, the music of using this video is the work of one of our panelists, Rokia, and it's a great, beautiful work. So before we start, I'm going to explain how this session will work, more or less. The idea is that we are going to divide the session in 4 different parts to tackle on different issues related to employment and jobs for peace and resilience. Each of the parts will start with questions from the audience, from the delegates, representing governments, workers, and employers. And yeah, this is very important. The people that ask the questions, could you please make sure that you don't do them longer than 2 minutes? That's because we are very tight on time, and what we really want to get here is the experience of all these people, and it's very important. If you get longer than 2 minutes, I'm afraid I will have to press you and cut you, and the question might be missing. So we can start now with the first question that comes from Patricia King from Ireland.
Good morning. I would like to make reference to the role of employers and workers' organisations and the importance of social dialogue. And in particular, the contribution of decent work to addressing the needs of basically the predominantly people who are affected by this precarious work, which is particularly women and young workers. So maybe some comments about the challenges faced by young men and women in finding decent work and ways to assist them in realising their ambitions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next question comes from Mr. Guido Ricci from Guatemala. I believe he's up there. Yeah.
Muchas gracias a nuestros panelistas por acompañarnos esta mañana. Provengo de un país que salió de un largo conflicto armado dentro de la lógica de la Guerra Fría. Esto fue hace 20 años o más. Se firmaron acuerdos de paz que pretendían cambiar las circunstancias que dieron origen al conflicto. Se hizo especial énfasis en aspectos económicos y sociales, dentro de los cuales figura la búsqueda de empleo en condiciones dignas, claro está. Se ha avanzado mucho en materia económica, también en diálogo social, creación de un Consejo Económico Social y más recientemente una Comisión Nacional de Relaciones Laborales y Libertad Sindical. Se ha recibido cooperación internacional. El gobierno actual también está muy activo en el tema, promoviendo un programa de trabajo decente muy ambicioso. No obstante, si bien la guerra terminó, la violencia común, el crimen organizado tomó terreno. El sector informal de la economía sigue en crecimiento. Muchísimas personas migran para buscar mejores condiciones en otros países, principalmente a los Estados Unidos de América. Queda claro que la paz es condición necesaria, pero no suficiente para lograr mejor condiciones de vida. En su experta opinión, ¿cómo debieran modificarse las actuales condiciones posconflicto? Es decir, violencia común y crimen organizado, así como conflictividad social. ¿Cómo deberían modificarse, decía, para generar un entorno favorable para la creación de empresas sostenibles, generadoras de empleo digno? Gracias.
Thank you very much. The third question would come from the representative of the government of Turkey.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Madam Moderator. I am speaking on behalf of Western European Group. We are currently faced with one of the worst forced displacement crises in recent history. Large numbers of people are forced to uproot themselves and their families from their homes and take great risks to undertake dangerous journeys to flee conflicts, human rights abuses, violence, and natural disasters. Between 2015 and 2017, about 3.1 million third country nationals sought asylum in the European Union, of which 1.4 million were awarded refugee status and thus resulting in international protection. In this regard, frontline EU member states are still bearing the brunt of continued arrivals. Turkey also shoulders a significant responsibility in hosting almost 4 million refugees. Taking this into account, continued cooperation is crucial. A large program of support encompassing our own particular region has been launched by the European Union in cooperation with affected countries and other international organizations. While each country is trying to do its best to tackle this challenge, inter-regional cooperation helps share the burden and responsibility and provide support to the most affected countries and communities. It is very evident that this situation requires global solidarity, equitable burden and responsibility sharing and international partnerships. The basic needs of refugees, host countries and communities must be at the core of any such initiative. The focus should be on humanitarian assistance, education and health services, municipal infrastructure, social protection, accessible and quality public services, socio-economic support and access to decent work. We urge the ILO to use its resources effectively in assisting members to provide crisis responses based on employment promotion, labor market integration, capacity development of local constituents, and institutions building in close cooperation with the relevant stakeholders. In this context, we would like to ask panelists about their expectations on the delivery of Global Compact on Refugees and its possible impact globally. A, what role can the ILO and its tripartite constituency play in ensuring shared international responsibilities are borne equitably and predictably? B, what can we add to the decent work agenda that can strengthen the international response to large movements of refugees and enhance refugee self-reliance? I thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. And the last question of this part will be done by Mr. Salim Badoura from Lebanon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm talking on behalf of my ambassador, who is chairing actually the UNCTAD now. Good morning, Mr. Director General, Chair, distinguished panel, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I wish to congratulate Her Excellency Ambassador Saja Majali for her appointment as President of our conference. Lebanon is honored to speak on behalf of the ASPAC Group in this very high-level event. Under Theme 1, the importance of employment generation and decent work for sustaining peace. Employment acceleration and decent work in countries of origin contribute to peace building and post-conflict reconstruction because they play a vital role in fostering social justice and facilitating solutions, particularly repatriation and sustainable reintegration. In this regard, ILO's work in this important area assumes significance, particularly for the countries in the ASPAC region, grappling with situations of fragility and recovering from the ravages of conflicts and devastation of disasters. Interventions in fragile states would greatly accelerate recovery and assist in creating conditions conducive to restoration of decent work. The issue is equally significant for many developing countries in our region, which have been shouldering the burden of extending international protection to a large number of refugees, often since decades, despite limited national resources and varying capacities. Their contributions are often not fully acknowledged, especially in devising initiatives with potential to further increase the burden on their national services and capacities. Our group, in particular its members hosting refugees, believe in the need for increased international cooperation, solidarity and responsibility sharing to ensure strengthening of protection and assistance regime for refugees and host communities. We have two questions. A, how can the ILO development partners and private sector ensure that their complementary efforts could support and sustain decent work interventions in order to reduce fragility in countries of origin, as well as to address economic factors spurring forced displacement? B, how can developed countries share the burden of host countries by addressing their own labor market deficits by offering labor mobility pathways for refugees and their hosting communities? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Just one clarification so we avoid frustration. We will be talking about challenges, programs, partnerships along the session. So we might not answer exactly all that in this first round, but we will come at some point. Okay, so let's start with the role of decent job in the in areas of post-conflict or in conflict, and what role it can play. I think, Elder, it would be nice to start with you and your experience with the G7+.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates and fellow panelists, all protocols observed. This topic on decent work in conflict-affected states, we embrace this wholeheartedly. Why I say this? Because I represent 20 constituencies around the world, ranging from the Pacific, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. And we signed an MOU with ILO in 2014. The strategic partnership embraced the so-called job for peace in fragile and conflict-affected states. And young people, especially in fragile states, they live in cycles of poverty, in violence. There are two root causes of problems that we face in fragile and conflict-affected states after listening to some of the interventions from distinguished delegates. One is natural disaster, and the other one is man-made politics, which create a lot of suffering in fragile states. That's why we face this kind of massive refugees coming from source countries to Europe. I will have a more saying later on how the G7+ handled the case of refugees in one particular country, but later on. But for us, the decent job is imperative. It's important for us because employment generation, in particular jobs for peace, is very much important in relation to peace building and state building. The G7+ embraced the so-called the first formula of international dialogue for peace building and state building. And back in 2011, the G7+, together with our international partners, we signed the so-called the New Deal for engagement in fragile states. And out of those 5 peace building state building goals, peace building state building goals number 4 is dealing with the livelihoods, jobs for people in fragile states. This is very important and at hardcore. And when we link to the Agenda 2030, goal number 8, and goal number 16, which we very much, as a champion in this goal number 16, you cannot have development without security, and you cannot have security without development. But if I may add, You cannot deliver the service to the people without strong institutions. And this is where the strategic partnership we'll talk about later on will come at place. Thank you.
Lucia, how has been your experience as in Bosnia as a post-conflict, and what role has decent jobs do you think play there?
Thank you very much, Madame Rombino. Thank you, Director General. Such a high panel, and to represent my country, it's a great honor here. I will talk about first and second question, and to try to answer to gentleman who is coming from the country which is in post-conflict and in the situation which is very challenging as mine. As we all know, Bosnia-Herzegovina has had some troublesome recent past, and even today, politically, the situation full of challenges. As the complexity of the issues increase, so do we need greater cooperation within the country, but also with our partners in the international community. What I can say, we face huge challenges for youth, women, and ex-combatants after the post-conflict to find some decent jobs. And because, as you know, we were affected in 1990s with the Great War, and still we face many challenges. So how to resolve the challenges? I would like to say it's crucial for us all to build upon the resilience of our communities, to adapt, to withstand and recover from the consequences of our challenges. Capacity must be developed for sure on the national level, so that the states and their people do not depend on the assistance of external actors in situation of crisis. So this is one way we are dealing with the crisis, with the help of international community, ILO, with the partners, but then we will talk about the partnership and maybe programs later on. Thank you.
Sylvia, the ex-combatants is one of the themes that you, of course, is a problem in Colombia also, and you, Intercell, has been working with that specific group also, no? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Claro que sí. Lo primero, agradecerle a Carolina y agradecer esta oportunidad de estar hablando de Colombia y de lo que una empresa privada puede aportar en el tema de empleo y paz. Yo creo, Carolina, frente a lo que tú estabas preguntando, hay, digamos, muchísimas teorías que puedan estar relacionando la paz con el empleo y suena casi que obvio. Sin embargo, hay una palabra que yo utilizaría y que no se usa mucho en estos documentos formales, pero creo que es la palabra más importante, y es el hecho de que un excombatiente pueda tener confianza, pueda tener esperanza. Cuando hablamos de esperanza, cuando hablamos de futuro, cuando hablamos de que una persona que sale de una guerrilla, que sale de una selva, que ha estado todo el tiempo metido en un mundo totalmente diferente, lo que necesita es la seguridad de poder tener un medio para educar a sus hijos, para poder mantenerlos. Es tener la confianza de que el día de mañana se puede levantar y no va a estar muerto de hambre. Este es un tema fundamental y es un tema que tiene que ver con muchos de los challenges de los que vamos a hablar más adelante, y era una de las preguntas tuyas. Y cuando nosotros le preguntamos a los excombatientes qué es lo que necesitan, dicen: necesitamos mirar al futuro con confianza. Y creo que la confianza es algo que nos da el trabajo. Cuando tenemos un empleo formal, cuando tenemos un empleo digno, cuando tenemos un empleo que nos permita pensar en un futuro, podemos pensar asimismo en la paz. Creo que ese es el gran aprendizaje.
Rokia, your experience in Mali, it's with young people and women, and you use arts as a vehicle to arrive to peace and to get decent jobs. Can you tell us a bit about your experience?
Oui, merci de cette opportunité extrêmement importante pour avant tout l'artiste que je suis et artiste d'un monde et puis je dirais d'un continent et d'un pays où on ne tient pas forcément compte du rôle de l'art et de la culture lors des crises, pour la prévention également des crises, et on ne considère pas suffisamment ces secteurs-là comme des secteurs économiques importants. Dans le cas spécifique de l'Afrique, c'est un secteur important, d'autant que grand-chose n'a pas été fait concernant une très très grande richesse qui est un énorme potentiel, et il est du coup très facile de développer quelque chose puisque nous sommes encore au niveau des bases d'une économie qui a du mal à exister et qui pourtant fait fructifier fructifie énormément et représente déjà, fait partie d'une certaine économie à l'étranger. Je pense à l'art plastique africain en général et à la musique. Et puis le cinéma, le théâtre, etc. C'est une réelle économie ailleurs où il existe une économie culturelle et artistique, et pourtant ça ne sert pas à grand-chose dans le continent. Et en cela même, les artistes sont ennuyés et entravés dans leur rôle de vecteur de cohésion sociale, de prise de vecteur, de prise de conscience d'elle-même, de toute une société, parce que c'est en cela que ça devient délicat. Pendant un conflit, nous avons besoin de continuer à savoir qui nous sommes afin de pouvoir continuer à vivre ensemble, d'où nous venons, nous rappeler une histoire, etc. Et c'est pendant les conflits qu'il est très difficile de continuer à véhiculer la culture et les arts. Et sans compter toutes les œuvres artistiques et les secteurs culturels qui sont abîmés et qui disparaissent pendant ce temps. Donc, c'est à propos de tout cela que nous essayons de faire un travail au Mali.
Yeah. You were telling me before about a very interesting example that we will have time to go on later with it. Rosa, tell us about your perspective. You're representing the workers, how important it is, and how do you see decent work?
Muy buenos días. Gracias, director general, por la invitación. Gracias, Carolina. Efectivamente, para los trabajadores, yo creo que es de grandes expectativas cuando se habla de trabajo decente, porque el trabajo decente creo que lo ambicionamos todos y todas. Buscamos siempre mejorar cada día en la parte laboral y creo que es lo fundamental cuando logramos obtener un trabajo que vaya ligado a mejorar, a tener un salario digno, a tener protección social, a tener el derecho a la libertad sindical, a tener una negociación colectiva y, por supuesto, a generar un diálogo con los otros actores. Entonces, de todas esas cosas lindas que ambicionamos, y aquí toco un poco el tema de Colombia, el tema de los trabajadores y trabajadoras colombianos, al cual hemos ambicionado, hemos luchado, pero nos hace falta muchísimo para lograr tener un trabajo decente y digno. Ahora, en todos estos espacios al cual aquí las preguntas surgieron, en el tema que tiene que ver con los desastres, con el tema de migración, creo que allí hay algo, hace falta algo, y es un diálogo con el mismo gobierno, con los actores sociales, porque en Colombia acabamos de pasar de estamos en un posconflicto y lo ideal sería que los trabajadores o los sindicatos se involucraran en mirar y revisar en qué condiciones están los actores, porque se pueden mencionar algunos, pero no general. ¿Qué ha sucedido, por ejemplo, con los desplazados? ¿Qué ha sucedido con estas mujeres que han vivido todo este conflicto, que han sido víctimas? ¿Qué está sucediendo con lo que sucedió, por ejemplo, en el departamento de Putumayo? Bueno, más adelante estaremos hablando, pero quería mencionar que lo fundamental sería un diálogo social.
Okay. Filippo, she started talking about displacement, and of course it has to do with refugees also, and that's your subject. How do you see, it's one of the biggest problems in our days, many people here are concerned about it. What is the role of decent job there? Are we arriving late? No.
Thank you. Of course, I'll speak here from that perspective. But let me share a first impression. When you deal with forced displacement with refugees, as my colleagues and I do, with our partners, the challenges that you think of are challenges of survival, of sustainability, of dignity, of identity, of inclusion, and eventually of solutions and going back home. I cannot think of anything more relevant to addressing all these challenges, and we'll talk more about challenges later. I cannot think of anything more relevant than the title of this conference, than, what is it, Employment and Decent Work. Employment and decent work addresses all these aspects of exile, if it is addressed. Refugees, displaced people, almost 70 million of them around the world today, are the outcome of a failure of peace. And if, among other things, their ability to be respectfully and gainfully employed is not met, then they will continue to be a factor of instability. We heard interventions from representatives of countries that host large numbers of refugees, Lebanon, Turkey. We heard our chair, she represents Jordan, a country hosting a large proportion of refugees, and they know very well, and they said it, if that is not addressed, these people become a factor of instability. If you address it, they can be, and they should be, a contributor to peace, a contributor to stability, a contributor even to prosperity. And for that, the aspect of work needs to be addressed. Let me also say one more thing, especially in response to the Lebanese question, because I think it's a very important one. This does not stop with exile. This has to continue, this investment, and we'll talk about how we are looking at it in new ways with new partners in the next items. But this does not stop with exile. This has to go on in building solutions for displacement, and eminently with building conditions for safe and dignified return and for employment again, and work and self-reliance in the countries where they go back to. And this goes also to the Guatemalan question. You have to address the root causes. This is political work, conflict resolution work, but it has to be coupled and matched with proper investments so that poverty, exclusion, discrimination, which are also part of the root causes, do not become a factor of displacement over and over again, as we have seen in many parts of the world.
Many thanks to all our panelists. We will start now the second part, in which we will really try to get more now into the ground and examples of challenges, problems, and solutions, as Filippo was saying. And we will start again with a round of questions. And the first one comes from the representative of the Paraguayan government. Is here? where it has to be seen. Paraguay? Ah, okay. Your question?
Muchas gracias, señora. En nombre del Grupo de América Latina y el Caribe, tengo el honor de referirme al papel de los gobiernos en la priorización del empleo y trabajo decente. En los países en conflicto y aquellos que se encuentran en situaciones particularmente difíciles, es importante que los gobiernos adopten medidas adecuadas para brindar seguridad a los trabajadores en sus empleos y mantener la cobertura de seguridad social. Una de las estrategias que se puede aplicar es combinar enfoques políticos y apoyo institucional en iniciativas tanto del propio país como aquellas que cuenten con el apoyo de la OIT y otras agencias de Naciones Unidas. Hay que tener en cuenta a ese respecto que existen ciertos grupos vulnerables que se ven afectados en mayor medida y que pueden tener dificultades para el acceso y mantenimiento de empleos decentes, especialmente para los jóvenes, más aún teniendo en cuenta que, según estudios realizados, los mismos constituyen más de un tercio de la población de los países afectados por la fragilidad. De esta forma, las crisis inciden más en los jóvenes, ya que a ellos muchas veces carecen de educación formal, de experiencia profesional, así como de competencias relacionadas con el trabajo. Es evidente que el no acceso a empleo puede llevar a los jóvenes a la ociosidad, que conlleva muchas veces la frustración de los mismos. Por ello es recomendable articular políticas públicas gubernamentales con la cooperación internacional, de manera a evitar que los mismos recurran a los empleos informales o se dediquen a actividades criminales para generar ingresos. Entendemos que la labor de la OIT en ese sentido debe enfocarse en la experiencia internacional con la que cuenta el personal de la oficina para abordar situaciones similares en otros países en conflictos o que puede contar con el apoyo de otros gobiernos a través de la cooperación bilateral.
Y la pregunta, perdón, es que...
La pregunta,
sí.
La pregunta es, realmente este es un interés manifestado por el GRULAC. La pregunta es cómo lograr la creación de políticas para la juventud que contribuyan a una consolidación de la paz.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Seguimos. La pregunta que sigue es de I'm sorry, I'm speaking Spanish. From the representative of Tunisia, Mr. Khalil Gariani. Did I pronounce it right? Tunisia is, where is? Yeah. Around there. Yeah.
Merci, Madame. Je prends la parole non seulement en ma qualité de délégué employeur participant à la conférence, mais aussi et surtout en tant qu'acteur sur le terrain œuvrant dans un pays qui connaît une transition démocratique difficile, mais une transition à pas sûre et porteuse d'acquis et d'espoir. Dans mon pays, la Tunisie, l'objectif de la promotion d'emploi et la création des postes de travail pour les jeunes est sur la liste des priorités nationales et les défis à relever par tous. Et nous avons bénéficié à ce sujet d'une assistance technique ô combien précieuse de la part du BIT, dont nous remercions tous ceux qui ont contribué d'une manière ou d'une autre. Et nous avons entrepris plusieurs initiatives et mis en place des programmes d'urgence ainsi que des mécanismes d'accompagnement et d'insertion pour les jeunes et avons affecté un certain nombre de fonds pour les interventions sociales et le traitement du chômage. Mais nous constatons l'insuffisance de tous ces programmes et initiatives, bien que nécessaires. Ils ont montré leurs limites au niveau de l'aspect essentiel des programmes d'emploi et qui est celui de la pérennité, de la stabilité et de la durabilité. Lors d'un voyage, il est important de connaître son point de départ, le cap à tenir, ainsi que le point d'arrivée. Mais il est aussi important de connaître le chemin que nous empruntons et les moyens appropriés que nous utilisons. Je dis cela pour rappeler à l'assistance que la meilleure réponse que nous devons apporter en matière de création d'emplois décents et productif et l'investissement, la promotion de l'investissement et la création des entreprises dans un environnement adéquat. Sans ça, nous n'aurons jamais des emplois durables et de bonne qualité qui permettront aux jeunes d'exploser leur potentiel de créativité. Sans ça, nous tomberons dans des solutions de facilité qui n'assurent ni stabilité, ni paix, ni résilience. Sans ça, le travail décent cédera la place à l'informel et la précarité. Sans ça, nous ne ferons que fournir des calmants, mais n'assurerons jamais la guérison. Toute approche de résolution du chômage doit être nécessairement économique et doit trouver ses fondements dans la création de valeur ajoutée, de productivité au sein d'une économie réelle. Pour tout cela, nous souhaitons vivement que l'investissement soit le corollaire de la création d'emplois au niveau de toute politique et stratégie nationale. Le temps de crise et les zones de conflit sont les terrains fertiles de la propagation de l'économie informelle qui détruit les fondements du développement et les bases de croissance économique et du progrès social. Et là, permettez-moi de poser des questions, justement, aux fins d'assurer paix sociale et résistance et les régions de crise de conflit. Donc, quels doivent être donc les mécanismes premiers de base dont nous avons besoin en matière de transition de l'informel vers l'économie réelle, et ce sur un plan interne, régional et international? Quel rôle avec quelle intensité doivent jouer les partenaires sociaux tripartites afin de définir peut-être un modèle de croissance qui doit être de plus en plus inclusif? Quel apport en termes d'accompagnement économique peut fournir et engager la coopération internationale? Merci.
I will have to cut you there, sorry. You use much more than the 2 minutes. Let me remind you, please try to make your questions short, because if not, we will not have time for the discussion and the examples here. The next question comes from Mr. Modi Giro from Senegal.
Président, je vous remercie, Madame, de m'avoir donné la parole. Je voudrais donc remercier tous les panélistes qui nous ont entretenus d'un sujet important relatif à la recommandation 205 qui a fait l'objet l'année dernière déjà de beaucoup de discussions. À la lumière des interventions que nous avons enregistrées, je voudrais dire que un certain nombre de questions reviennent sur ce que nous voulons dire. D'abord que le travail décent et ses 4 piliers, parce que nous voulons mettre l'accent sur les 4 piliers du travail décent qui sont à notre avis indissociables. Parce qu'il s'agit de réfléchir sur la mise en œuvre de cette recommandation et la prise en compte non seulement des personnes touchées, déplacées, en situation de crise, mais du point de vue également de la prévention, de la gestion de la crise, de l'après-crise, mais également dans la reconstruction et la résilience. Et nous pensons que durant tout ce processus, le travail décent reste dans une dimension extrêmement importante pour les travailleurs. Notre question est très simple, Madame, c'est de poser la question à savoir, en mettant en relief le dialogue social, qui est également un des mécanismes qui nous permettrait, aussi bien avec les gouvernements qu'avec les partenaires sociaux, employeurs et travailleurs, des organisations les plus représentatives, bien sûr, de voir comment impliquer ces organisations d'employeurs et de travailleurs dans tout ce processus. Et là, nous voulons savoir quelle est la stratégie qu'on pourrait mettre pour que, au niveau des résultats, nous ayons des résultats plus efficaces. Je vous remercie, Madame.
Thank you. And the last question for this round is from the representative of the government of Liberia.
Excellent. Thank you. Allow me to say thanks to my sisters and brothers, colleagues from countries from Africa, for giving me the opportunity to ask this all-important question on behalf of our group. In every conflict situation, the vulnerable groups include women and children. In addition, limited attention is given to women empowerment in post-conflict setting. What role do we envisage for ILO and its constituents in empowering women to contribute to peace building and development at the community, local, and national levels. We thank you.
I think I would like to mess a bit the order that we had, because I think there are all the issues are coming together, and I think it would be more interesting for you to really talk about what you think. So we are listening mainly to challenges, solutions, programs, examples, young, women. So let's try to answer the more we can on that, and just go like that. We started with women. The last question was about women. I think, Sylvia, you work with women. Can you tell us a bit about how do you think we can improve their job conditions and maybe an example even if you have?
Sí, yo creo que digamos que aquí me queda más difícil stick a los 2 minutos porque hay muchísimos ejemplos. Pero yo voy a cumplirlo. Yo vengo de una empresa privada, una empresa que vende gasolina, la organización Terpel, que cualquiera diría que no tiene mucho que ver aquí. Pues tiene todo que ver, y es una de las cosas que yo creo que en objetivos tripartitas tenemos que encontrar, y es cómo las empresas realmente se vuelven aliadas del país, aliadas de la paz. Una de las cosas que nosotros hemos hecho, y por lo que digo que es difícil lo de los 2 minutos, es porque hay muchos espectros de cosas que hemos logrado, muchas de hecho a través de la OIT. Hay un memorando de entendimiento sobre cómo crear empleos rurales de mejor calidad. Y cuando uno habla de ruralidad en Colombia, habla mucho de las mujeres. La violencia en Colombia, los 50 años de guerra en los que estuvimos hasta el año pasado, a quien más afectó fue a las mujeres. Las mujeres fueron violadas, las mujeres fueron privadas de sus hijos, de sus esposos, y fueron llevadas a la guerra en su contra, y reintegrar esas mujeres es más difícil que reintegrar a los hombres. Terpel hace muchos años, antes del acuerdo de paz, trabajaba con el tema de reintegración, y no todo el mundo es consciente. Yo de hecho no lo creía. Reintegrar un hombre es relativamente fácil, reintegrar a una mujer es difícil, porque la sociedad de hecho es una sociedad que rechaza a una mujer que viene de la guerrilla, que ha sido violada, que puede haber tenido muchas relaciones dentro de esa violencia, donde su familia tampoco la recibe mucho, donde los niveles de analfabetismo o de educación son mucho menores en las mujeres que en los hombres. Hemos hecho muchísimos programas donde, hablando de cosas específicas, Carolina, cuando yo digo quiero reintegrados, al principio solo me llegaban hombres, hasta que un día dije solo quiero mujeres, y si no me mandan mujeres no voy a recibir más reintegrados. Y poco a poco eso se va logrando, pero no es fácil, entonces tiene uno que hacer cosas específicas. Hay algo que se puede hacer con los gremios empresariales también. Uno de los gremios, o tal vez el gremio más importante que existe en Colombia, que se llama la ANDI, y recoge varios de los sectores de Colombia, o tal vez todos en el empresariado. Tiene programas como que se llama la ANDI del futuro, y es como coge ya no a las mujeres, sino a todos los jóvenes, hombres y mujeres, para darles una oportunidad en emprendimiento, para que puedan pensar en ese futuro en el que hablaba en la primera pregunta y puedan realmente reintegrarse. Pero para poder cumplirle a Carolina con el tiempo.
Ya te pasaste. You're over already. No, don't worry, continue. Just finish.
Solo 2 segundos. Como, lo importante es entender que todos podemos hacer algo, que lo estamos haciendo en Colombia, que nos falta mucho, pero lo importante es entender cuáles son los problemas para poder atacarlos.
Thank you very much. Rokia, I would like to turn to you, because you told me in the morning about a very interesting program for the restaurant of the foundation, actually, that you preside. Could you share it with us?
Oui, alors en fait, ce que nous essayons de faire est de repérer quels sont les secteurs où il y a du travail à organiser, parce qu'il s'agit bien de cela. Nous sommes tous d'accord qu'il est important de continuer à travailler pendant le conflit et de travailler avant le conflit pour les éviter, mais selon les cas spécifiques, le genre de travail, l'organisation de la société, les habitudes culturelles ne fournissent pas les mêmes nécessités. Et il est très important de repérer dans quel secteur il y a du travail à développer. Et là, les partenaires sociaux ont un rôle très important en allant dans la société à un niveau d'abord très restreint, et ensuite pour prendre ces cas spécifiques de quartier en quartier, les comparer, comprendre la situation d'une ville, d'un pays, ainsi de suite. C'est ce que nous essayons de faire et c'est ainsi que nous avons constaté un manque énorme au niveau de la culture et des arts encore, et tous les autres métiers qui s'y rattachent. Et nous attirons donc des jeunes, ça n'est pas très difficile parce que ceux qui viennent travailler sur le chantier des salles de spectacle, de tous les espaces de la Fondation, nous repérons les manières de travailler et nous essayons de faire en sorte que l'informel devienne plus structuré. Dans les métiers dans lesquels ils sont, nous allons aller vers celui qui fabrique les fenêtres pour lui demander de prendre en charge des jeunes ruraux qui sont venus, qui sont des journaliers. Donc très concrètement, c'est un travail cas par cas que je suis convaincue qui peut s'étaler à toute une ville et tout un pays et que c'est de cette façon qu'il faut procéder parce que ce qui vaut pour le Mali ne sera pas nécessaire pour la Turquie, ainsi de suite. Il est extrêmement important de donner un rôle aux partenaires sociaux qui est le repérage des besoins et ensuite leur demander leur avis, arriver à mettre en place les circonstances qui leur permettent d'analyser et donner leur analyse par rapport au repérage des besoins, des méthodes de formation, parce que c'est extrêmement utile, et pour sortir de l'informel et aller vers un secteur professionnel organisé et structuré.
In the next round, it would be great if you tell us about the restaurant and the women you train there, because I think that's a very specific and very successful. So maybe we can leave it for a bit later for a happy end also. I would really like for you to share this experience with the floor. Elder, what are the main challenges that you see, and can you tell us about one specific program that could be shared in the light of the questions that we have received?
Thank you. When I listen to the interventions from distinguished delegates, I can't wait to share with you some of the practical examples that we, the G7+, faced in the wake of preventing the conflict, preventing the refugee crisis, and so on. One particular example, and I'd like to hear also from Mr. Filippo Grandi's point of view from the UNHCR. And I see the delegation from Central African Republic, they're not here, or they may not be here. You know, for those of you who travel to Bangui Airport, back a couple of years ago, the moment you land in the Bangui Airport, you see thousands of refugees are scattered in the camps around Bangui Airport. They've been there for years. And we managed to resolve this in a simple and straightforward solution. How did we do this? We talked to UNHCR, you talked to the UN mission in Bangui, in the capital. We also talked to the government at that time. And the solution came, and the lesson we learned is that it all goes back to the trust built between international actors and the local government. You ought to trust them to find the local solution for their own people. This is the spirit of the G7+, based on the spirit of solidarity, cooperation, and volunteerism. How did we do this? These 28,000 families who are scattered in the airport of Bangui, they need to go back to their own village. They need to go back to their own neighborhood. But the security condition couldn't prevent them or couldn't allow them. How did we do this? The main thing is that at least you provide a safe environment for them to go back to their own village. Despite thousands, millions of dollars that pour into Central African Republic, there was no solution. But the G7 Plus came with a small little resource coming from a fragile state to help another fellow fragile state, and it worked. So the lesson we learned is that with a small, pitiful resource, with the degree of power, of willpower and trust to the government, you can resolve this. And it's a lesson that I would like to share this with Mr. Filippo Grandi from UNHCR. Second example, again, we talk about the internal displaced people. My own country, Timor-Leste, in 2006 we faced crisis. 150,000 people were displaced everywhere in the city. How did you do this? We talked to the international partners. There was no, because of the bureaucratic impediments and so on, there was no straightforward assistance coming in. In the end, the government had to dig down in its own pocket in order to resolve the crisis using some kind of monetary incentive. And they provide $5,000 for each family to repatriate them, to return them to the village, to help rebuild their own village, their own house, and so on. And this provides job to the young people. And the young people, in the end, couldn't create troubles in my home country. The third example, if I may.
Short.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is the Afghanistan Project Salam, support Afghanistan livelihoods and mobility. This, again, credit to the Minister of Social Solidarity in that country, work together with ILO in particular, and in terms of providing economic recovery, job creation for people at the country level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Filippo, he wants so much to hear from you that it's your turn then.
Thank you. And I'm glad you opened up a little bit the boxes because we can go from one to the other. I think I just want to make a reflection in terms of challenges and responses. I spoke earlier about almost 70 million refugees and displaced. This is also, of course, part of a much bigger number of people on the move, but let's focus on that at least. I have to add one element which is often forgotten, and often forgotten in rich countries. And that element is that almost 90% of those 65, 70 million people are in countries with very limited resources, poor countries or middle-income countries. That is a very important element to keep in mind when we talk about, on top of having an additional population, creating job opportunities for that additional population. And the other challenge, which was raised by the Irish delegation earlier and others, is that a very large proportion of those 70 or 65, 70 million are young people or women. And you can easily see that failure to create those opportunities carries enormous risks in terms of exploitation, in terms of marginalization, exclusion, and in terms of radicalization, which is a very big problem, a very big challenge that is emerging more and more in large displacement situations. Therefore, I think that, and I hope I will have a chance to talk more about this, we really need to make a shift, and we are promoting, as a humanitarian organization, a shift in the culture and mentality of responses from purely humanitarian, which is the traditional response to large displacement, to developmental, to long-term. And building broader coalitions. We are testing this new approach with the World Bank, with the local civil society, with the private sector, with a variety of new partners in 14 countries around the world. And we have actually tested new approaches in the Middle East for Syrian refugees, in Jordan, for example, with the creation of an EU-sponsored program of favorable trade conditions for companies that employ a percentage of refugees, but also bring prosperity to the local community. And I can give you many examples of that. Now, just two final points here. One is that in doing this, in advocating this shift to a different approach, we are enormously helped by instruments that you have established, by the guiding principles in this area of the ILO, and by this recommendation 205, which is, if I understand correctly, the updating of a very old recommendation on post-conflict and resilience. These are fundamental frameworks that we can use in developing new approaches, and we are very grateful to the ILO and guys here, but also to the conference for having worked unanimously, if I understand, on these issues. And finally, let's not forget, all this will be very, very important as we move toward the establishment of 2 global compacts, one on refugees and one on migrants, in the General Assembly at the end of the year, that should really, I speak in particular of the Refugee Compact, establish consolidate this new approach that I'm talking about, and of which I hope we will have chances to speak more later.
So, Lucia and Rosa, I apologize, but you will not have time in this round, but you have priority in the next one, okay? Because we need to move on to the next round of questions. Again, please, please, please try to be short, because if not, we are really losing very valuable time here. The first intervention is from Mr. Felix Mutagoma from Rwanda.
Merci beaucoup. Je m'appelle Félix Mutagoma. Je travaille pour le secteur privé du Rwanda. Ici, je voudrais vous partager l'expérience du Rwanda, mais aussi en profiter pour poser une question. Comme vous le savez tous, le Rwanda est un pays qui a subi des conflits et des crises particulièrement sévères qui ont abouti au génocide des Tutsis de 1994. Aujourd'hui, 24 ans après, le Rwanda a pu surmonter le génocide de 1994 pour finalement devenir un des pays hautement performants et un des pays qui enregistre la croissance économique la plus rapide. Ce modèle économique visait effectivement à atteindre une croissance inclusive qui s'est traduite dans qui va dans le sens d'atteindre la croissance, qui s'est traduit dans la réduction de la pauvreté de manière significative. L'un des facteurs qui ont joué un rôle important a été la facilitation des affaires du commerce. Là, je vais parler du doing business. Plus particulièrement, la Fédération du secteur privé a joué un rôle crucial dans son programme de développement de l'entrepreneuriat et de l'innovation, dont la promotion des produits made in Rwanda, mais aussi la Fédération du secteur privé contribue à l'augmentation de la productivité et la création d'emplois de qualité plus nombreux et plus inclusifs, mettant surtout accent sur les jeunes et les femmes. La question...
I'm sorry, we need to have your question now.
Pardon?
We need to have your question, sorry.
Alors, ma question est, quels seraient les 2 éléments essentiels qui constitueraient le rôle de la coopération internationale avec les secteurs privés des pays émergents des conflits?
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Janis Reyes from Latvia.
Good morning, colleagues. At the outset, I would like to thank the panelists for their thought-provoking comments. Comprehensive employment strategies are crucial for promoting sustainable employment and decent work, not least when recovering from conflicts or when building peace and resilience in fragile situations. Creation of employment opportunities is a key component of the governmental and social partners' response to crisis situations. It should involve employment intensive investment approach that provide an option for economic activity and income. Such intervention need to be combined with training to increase the sustainability of activities. It is crucial to ensure a swift implementation of support programs. They should be well designed to ensure a quick return to the labor market as soon as the new jobs are created. Youth unemployment is a particular aspect to focus on. Specific programs aimed at youth, including intensive counseling, can be important to enable better informed decisions about future choice. The EU law instruments are the backbone of this process. The development initiatives on the ground and the role of local communities have to be considered as well. Summing up, economic transformation, the creation of supportive environment for sustainable enterprises, inclusive and viable labor market participation are key when recovering from conflicts or building peace or resilience in fragile situations. And I would like to ask the panelists to elaborate upon their view and experience with employment, intensive investment strategies during crisis situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we have now the representative of the government of Papua New Guinea?
Madam Chair and distinguished panel, the aspect recognizes the efforts of ILO in the forefront of addressing conflict disasters through flagship programs such as Jobs for Peace and Resilience. Through this program, ILO attempts to address root causes of economic, social, and environmental vulnerability to help countries break the vicious cycle of conflicts and disaster. It does so by providing opportunity to access employment and generate decent income in adequate protection of labor rights, which in turn contributes to reducing tensions, facilitates social cohesion, and builds resilience to future shocks. Our region is vulnerable to all the social ills of natural disaster, both inflicted by extreme climatic conditions, environmental disparities, and man-inflicted conflicts that occur somewhat repeatedly. Our question is, what intervention can the ILO and its member states encourage in the business continuity planning process so that the multinational enterprises can play an active role in rebuilding, reconstructing, and providing social security after natural disasters and conflict? Please answer with reference to the particular challenges for member states whose economies are small and at times rigid. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last one, Mr. Ayuba Waba from Nigeria. Nigeria? No? 1, 2. No one from Nigeria. Okay, so let's start, Lucia, with some of the answers. In this case, there was a lot of interest in partnerships, and we still have to talk about a bit about youth. So maybe, you know, the challenge in Bosnia after in the post-conflict would be a nice way of taking it.
So thank you very much for giving me the floor and for all the questions. I will try to combine at least 3 questions in my answer because they are quite interlinked. So what I would say that what Commissioner Grandi said, that ILO has guiding principles, and what Latvian minister said, that it's a backbone. For sure, we have to have a local solution for local people, as you have said, but as well with a larger holistic approach as envisaged in 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It's needed because sustainable development is a key to sustaining peace and vice versa. We have to have all involvement of all stakeholders, and this is of vital importance. So the public, private sectors, employers, organizations, businesses, companies, which present a pillar on which resilience is built. So we, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example, to answer the first question, we have strategic plans envisaged to help youth and special social programs in cooperation with ILO and other international organizations. So this is of the vital importance, the cooperation inside the country, on the state level, regional, cantonal, entity levels. It depends from which country you are coming and what organization it is, as well as with the international community in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rosa, now is you wanted to speak before, you were eager to tell me, huh? Okay. Yeah, you wanted to speak before and you were eager to, looking at me like wanted to say something, so I really could give you some freedom because to talk about the point you really wanted to make.
Gracias, Carolina. Efectivamente, quisiera tocar dos puntos. Uno, lo que mencionó el señor Modi, referente a la recomendación 205. Creo que es una herramienta que cumplió un año, que fue adoptada el año pasado y que recoge realmente elementos de muchas preguntas de cómo hacer en los países para generar empleo, un empleo decente. Es decir, esos elementos que tiene la 205, si existiera una voluntad política de los gobiernos, creo que allí tendríamos parte de la solución para generar un empleo decente. Y en segundo punto quisiera decirle a mi paisana, compañera y empresaria de Terpel, que la felicito por las acciones que está haciendo con los combatientes, con los desplazados, pero decir que en Colombia es insuficiente cualquier acciones que se esté haciendo en referencia. Tenemos una informalidad altísima, donde las más afectadas son las mujeres y los jóvenes. Allí tenemos muchas dificultades. Tenemos dificultades en la discriminación. Tenemos muchas dificultades en la forma de contratación a los jóvenes, a que los jóvenes consigan realmente un empleo decente. Es decir, a un joven recién salido de una universidad, inmediatamente le están solicitando 3, 5 años de experiencia. Y esto, por supuesto, no lo va a tener un recién egresado de una universidad. Puede tener un cartón, mas no esa experiencia. Y eso está sucediendo y está generando cada día el desempleo. Entonces, quería mencionar esto. Y referente a lo que mencionaba el señor de África, sobre cómo las mujeres podemos aportar a la paz. Yo creo que las mujeres sí le hemos aportado siempre a la paz. Siempre hemos estado allí. Hemos trabajado. Ponemos la cuota más grande, lo mencionó aquí mi compañera. En el tema de los conflictos han sido las más afectadas, las que han asumido roles de mamá y papá. Entonces yo creo que no es pedir más, sino gestionar y decir que en Colombia realmente hay que hacer acciones en un empleo decente, porque tenemos muchas dificultades en el tema que tiene que ver con las desigualdades, con la pobreza. Esto existe. Hay cosas bonitas, se dicen cosas muy lindas, pero realmente la realidad de los que vivimos allí, los que cogemos buses todos los días, vemos otras situaciones. Entonces quería mencionar esto.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Rokia, let's take on her point of people even, coming from university even with a diploma but step before even, and go back to the example that I wanted you to share, which were women in a very, very vulnerable condition. And can you tell us what did you do and how it worked?
Alors, comme je disais tout à l'heure, il est une réalité qui est que selon les cultures des pays et leurs histoires, les situations ne sont pas exactement les mêmes, même si nous sommes d'accord que le travail décent est une solution pour tous. Dans le cas du Mali et de ce que nous faisons là, les jeunes qui sortent, effectivement, dont on a besoin qu'ils aient de l'expérience, sont une réalité partout. C'est vrai que ça n'est pas logique. À un moment, il faut leur permettre leur premier emploi pour qu'ils puissent entrer dans le secteur du travail. Et ce que nous faisons, c'est que nous ne les refusons pas, mais il y a beaucoup à faire pour un bon nombre de métiers. Nous avons repéré, nous, que dans le secteur de la restauration et de l'hôtellerie, il y a beaucoup d'hôtels au Mali, il y a beaucoup de restaurants, mais voir cela, l'accueil dans un hôtel ou la cuisine comme un art est une autre étape. Et cela tient de la formation et du fait de donner le plus d'occasions possible à ces jeunes de découvrir ces secteurs-là avec une vision qui va au-delà des frontières du pays. Qu'est-ce que l'hôtellerie, qu'est-ce que cet accueil, qu'est-ce qu'ils sont censés vendre et comment il faut le faire. Alors nous avons décidé, au bout d'un certain nombre d'embauches qui n'allaient pas, de travailler avec des jeunes filles, jeunes diplômées ou certaines qui ont abandonné les études à un moment donné et d'en embaucher une dizaine qui sont payées, elles ont un salaire. Elles sont nombreuses parce qu'aucune d'entre elles n'est professionnelle, donc il nous en faut beaucoup. Et avec ma petite expérience d'avoir travaillé dans des restaurants et des hôtels pendant mes études, je travaille avec elles pour la base. Et dans le futur, l'idée est de pouvoir faire venir des cuisiniers professionnels pour faire des stages avec elles. Et pour le moment, ce que nous arrivons à leur enseigner comme expérience leur permet très concrètement de travailler pour l'accueil de ceux qui viennent en résidence à la Fondation pour créer leur spectacle, pour le fonctionnement du théâtre où nous faisons aussi de la restauration. Donc ça reste, comme je disais, un travail très local, très spécifique en prenant le cas par cas. Et ensuite aussi, on collabore avec d'autres associations de femmes du quartier. Même le simple nettoyage du site devient quelque chose à apprendre. Où ranger les balais, comment donner l'information à celles qui montent l'après-midi et surtout se débrouiller pour fournir un salaire décent à chacun ou chacune pour son travail. Parce que finalement, le travail décent, c'est cela. C'est le travail à partir duquel on arrive à correctement gagner sa vie et faire comprendre à tout le monde la notion du respect dans le travail. Celle qui doit balayer et nettoyer n'a pas un travail inférieur parce que sans son travail, le lieu n'est pas propre. Alors celui qui va trouver les marchés et amener des clients n'est pas plus important que ceux qui s'occupent du nettoyage, etc. Donc c'est vraiment la formation et l'apprentissage de certains principes professionnels.
Thank you very much. Filippo, you wanted more time to talk about, I think that's a thing that has come up a lot about partnerships and how to unite efforts. And do you have examples of that and, you know, what we can learn from what you are doing now with the ILO?
Yeah, well, I wanted to since I spoke longer earlier, I'll be quick now.
Good.
Just 3 quick points. One is, I come from a world, the humanitarian world, in which the private sector, the business community, has traditionally been seen as philanthropy, as charity. We need to move, again, my whole plea to move to different approaches. We need to move to partnerships with the private sector, which is completely different. Well, it is different. The private sector needs to maintain that philanthropic aspiration, but we need to channel it in different ways, and we need to make an effort. We're doing, we are doing interesting things. With the help of the World Bank International Finance, the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, we are working on creating, for example, opportunities for investment in a region of northern Kenya where there are many South Sudanese and other refugees, hundreds of thousands of them. And with some results. Of course, we need the World Bank with its resources and expertise because you need to do some preparatory work. You need to do training, as as Rokia was saying, you need to help people get to the point where they are attractive for investment, because investing in fragile situation does not come natural to the private sector. So I think there is an important element of reflection there, and we're working in various parts of the world. The second is, I would agree with Rosa Elena very much, a special investment in these situations in women. The women are carrying the weight of resilience. Many times because there is no man. And many times because they are the ones with the greater interest in stability, in peace, and in solutions. So a plea, when we talk about partnerships and investments, in focusing especially on women. And third and last, many people spoke or refer to education. You know, it's much easier for us in this effort to attract different partnerships, to find partners ready to invest in education. Education is somehow more linear, more simple. But if there is no linkage between education investment and employment investment, you just, I don't want to exaggerate, you create a monster. You create an educated population that has no employment outlets. And it is possible in situation of forced displacement, especially when people cannot move much and cannot go away from that confined situations they're in. So a plea also to have a more structured, a more deliberate link between education and work going forward.
Thank you very much. We need to move to the round 4 of questions, so we have you priority for the next round. But I really would appreciate if you can only do the question, because we are running very late. And if you don't, I mean, if you make interventions, there will not be time for the panel to intervene again. I think it would be very nice to listen to them again. So can we take the question, please, from the representative of the government of Botswana?
Thank you very much, moderator. Let me express my gratitude to the Africa Group who allowed me to ask this question on their behalf. And the question is as follows. I'll start with the background information. There is a long history within the United Nations of efforts invested in the area of sustainable peace, as contained in the 1992 report of the United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali on preventative diplomacy, peacemaking, and the 1998 United Nations Security Council report on the causes of conflict and the promotion of durable peace and sustainable development in Africa. In this regard, what will be the role of the ILO in ensuring that the current agenda for peace by the United Nations Secretary General goes beyond early warning systems, diffusing of tensions and disarmament, to focus on the full implementation of the 2 reports while addressing the root causes of conflict, including present inequalities among nations, with a particular focus on fragile and conflict-affected countries, to present real opportunities to decent work and employment, in particular targeting the youth. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Anchetatan from the Philippines.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions would have something to do with policy approaches, but I would just like to put it in context. When we discuss a post-conflict situation, I think we are dealing with an abnormal situation. Therefore, it is not business as usual. In certain cases, there are desperate situations, and they call for desperate measures. My questions are these, and it is that there are constraints and policy constraints with respect to technical assistance and resources when it comes to the United Nations and the ILO. My question with respect to technical assistance is this. Shouldn't the ILO concentrate on job creation and skills development more than anything else in its expertise, including promotion of standards and other fundamental principles? And with respect to resources, shouldn't the United Nations and the ILO also waive its policy rejection or objection to receiving assistance, like, for example, from the tobacco industry? Because we do not have the luxury of determining and excluding assistance when we try to rebuild and rehabilitate areas destroyed by armed conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sahur Awam from Pakistan, please.
Thanks, Madam Moderator. The role of the ILO for the strategic partnership for peace building and the sustainable development agenda is very important. Close to the World War II, ILO signed the Philadelphia Declaration, which highly stipulates labor is not a commodity and poverty anywhere constitutes danger to prosperity everywhere. ILO then in the past and onward has put its values for decent employment for the vulnerable population, including those affected by conflict and fragility. In this context, the panelist elaboration is needed that how the affected population from the onset of a crisis get immediate job opportunity, promotion of needed skills as mentioned by DG, particularly in the local economic development and resilience. Second is, as delegate from the Botswana, he very rightly mentioned about tackling the root causes of the conflict, which definitely is how to invest on people rather than on arms. And that is one of the reasons in which if many of the countries such as where they freeze their military expenditure at the level would give them a peace dividend, that it would be enough to see that all children do have an access to primary education and primary health care in those countries. The important aspect of social dialogue is very important in particularly formulating prevention frameworks in the fragile and conflict-affected countries, and finally promotion of core labor standards in the countries of origin.
Thank you very much. And the last question, please, from the Paraguayan representative of the government. If you can make it very short, we have only 10 minutes left.
I promise. Thank you. Gracias, señora Robino. Muy brevemente, en función al trabajo y empleo decente en conflicto y posconflicto, como estamos hablando, resulta evidente, se hace evidente la necesidad de prestar atención a los grupos vulnerables, a los jóvenes, a las personas que pertenecen a minorías, a pueblos indígenas y tribales, a afrodescendientes, a personas con discapacidad, a desplazados, emigrantes y refugiados. Estamos obligados, y es nuestro desafío, a darles herramientas apropiadas para su inserción en nuestros mercados laborales y a fortalecer su capacidad de recuperación por sí y para sí mismos y la de sus familias. Nuestra pregunta es, ¿cómo combinan los organismos internacionales, especialmente los de Naciones Unidas, sus recursos, su capacidad técnica, su experiencia de terreno, para apoyar a los gobiernos, especialmente a los gobiernos locales y a la sociedad civil, a integrar en su planificación, en su asignación de recursos, en sus servicios, a esta diversidad de grupos vulnerables que hacen parte de su comunidad y de su realidad diaria? Gracias, señora Ruino.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we will have only 1 minute per panelist, so I would say to all of you to try to address the more specific or what's more at your heart of what is being said here, because we will obviously not have time to answer all of the questions. Elder, you start, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very quick. After listening intervention from Botswana, Rwanda, and others, let me offer our practical solutions in terms of way forward. In terms of attracting private investment to fragile and conflict-affected states, 3 lessons we learn. 1, you need to invest in power, or they call energy. 2nd, invest in infrastructure, which for ILO's interest is related to basic infrastructure, labor-intensive work in basic infrastructure. And the 3rd point is about telecommunication. When you go to fragile states, you see a lot of mobile phone everywhere, even in the remote areas. And this is what attracted our colleagues and our private companies from China in many African countries, including in Asian countries. The last thing, since we talk about the strategic partnership, we have now the momentum. In the United Nations, in April this year, the President of the General Assembly hosted the first high-level session on sustaining peace, which here in Ireland this week. So there is a synergy between those UN agencies and also our strategic partners. We, the G7+, we wholeheartedly embrace the concept of decent work in fragile and conflict-affected states. And final word is that there can be no peace without development, and there can be no development without peace if we don't tackle the young and the women. Final point, strong woman leads to a strong nation, but a strong man leads to disaster in our nations. Thank you very much.
So, Silvia, you're a strong woman.
Me encanta, muchas gracias por esa determinación. Hace poco...
Is the microphone working?
Hola. Oí hace poco, y creo que para terminar es muy importante, a alguien decir una frase que me encantó y que refleja mucho la realidad y que también lleva a que los procesos tienen un tiempo, y él decía, el fin del conflicto armado nos saca del infierno, pero no nos lleva directo al cielo. Creo que ese es lo que estamos viviendo muchos de los países en donde hemos tenido fin del conflicto armado, y tenemos que trabajar mucho y tenemos todos los retos, pero todos tenemos que trabajar. Y quiero referirme a lo que decía Filippo sobre el tema de educación. Uno de los temas más importantes es el tema de la educación. Cerca del 47% de la gente que sale de Colombia, de la guerrilla, o que salió, eran personas que no tenían ningún grado de calificación para tener un empleo. Y el empleo puede ser de dos formas, y hemos venido trabajando en eso. Uno es emplear directamente a las personas, y otros es todo el tema del emprendimiento y de la proveeduría. El tema de proveeduría es supremamente importante, y es generar oportunidades para que la gente que salga no solo se emplee, sino que cree empresas ellos mismos y que sean proveedores de las empresas. Creo que ese es un tema súper importante del que no habíamos hablado. Y de nuevo, las mujeres han sido en Colombia los factores de mayor éxito en todo este tema, que todavía no es exitoso, como dice Rosa, falta mucho por adelantar, pero los proyectos que uno ve en el área rural son de mujeres. Es muy importante apoyar a las mujeres en este tema.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Lucia.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I agree what my panelists said till now, and to say that education, strong education in the country, especially in my country, is really necessity. I want to say that the accession to different organizations, international organizations like the EU in my country will bring a better prosperity to WTO, which will result in creating more jobs that we would like to achieve in the future, in near future. And as well, to say, yesterday I was at a concert of Barbara Hendricks, the ambassador of UNHCR, and she was saying that she met a family of young mother and a son, and she said, son, you forget the pride you must survive, when he was entering the boat. So today, with this discussion, with all of us in the room, we can say that the decent work will keep us pride, and we will survive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rosa.
Aprovecharé mi minuto para hablar sobre el trabajo decente. Creo que es fundamental el respeto de los derechos laborales y sindicales. Y ahí toco el tema de libertad sindical y el respeto por la libertad sindical. Es decir, que se pueda ejercer libremente, y no como los casos que están sucediendo en Colombia, como los despidos de los pilotos. también de acabar una empresa de un día para otro y despedir más de 500 mujeres cuando son las jefas de hogar mayoritariamente. Pero también quería tocar en este minuto la recomendación 205 habla sobre prevenciones y en este caso en Colombia tenemos una emergencia que estamos viviendo y es el tema de la hidroituango. Esto ojalá no suceda, pero hay que tener prevenciones, muchas prevenciones, porque estamos hablando de acabar y de arrasar muchas poblaciones de la ribera de 3 ríos. Y esto son desastres provocados por desviaciones de río, por supuesto que mal ubicados. Y decir también el tema que tiene que ver la cooperación. Sin duda, los países de mayor riqueza deben de proporcionar a los países que lo requieren, sobre todo en época de desastres y que tienen que ver con la pobreza. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Rokia, what do you would like to be your last?
Oui, en fait, j'aimerais m'exprimer sur le fait que lorsqu'il s'agit de création d'emplois, le repérage des secteurs qui peuvent produire des emplois est une étape très très importante. Alors, j'en reviens très lourdement au secteur culturel et artistique en Afrique en général. Il nous plairait à nous, artistes, que les organisations internationales, que l'OIT joue un rôle dans la reconnaissance des arts et de la culture en Afrique comme un secteur vecteur de développement et d'intégration et de reconnaître ce secteur comme un réel secteur économique. Et à tous nos gouvernements, je demanderais de prendre en considération le travail que nous tous, artistes africains, nous faisons et qui n'est pas suffisamment accompagné par rapport même au manque de politique culturelle dans nos différents pays et une politique qui puisse permettre le repérage de quel artiste fait quoi, qu'est-ce qu'il y a à développer et surtout la prise de conscience par rapport à ce que l'art et la culture africaine aujourd'hui représentent au niveau international et sur le marché international. Je suis convaincue que les photos de Malik Sidibé et de Seydou Keita rapportent beaucoup plus au marché international de l'art plastique qu'ils ne rapportent au Mali spécifiquement. Et cela est dommage. On a besoin de nous économiquement et on a besoin de nous en matière de cohésion sociale dans des pays avec d'énormes fractures sociales liées à toute une histoire extrêmement lourde qu'il serait bien aujourd'hui que nous puissions surmonter par notre richesse culturelle même et artistique.
Thank you very much. Filippo, you have a challenge, like 30 seconds.
Yes, and I will make only 2 points. The first is, since it came up in many questions, and maybe it's not necessary to say it, but ILO, and I want to thank the Director General who's here in front of me, has been a fundamental partner in this reflection that we are carrying out on shifting responses to development, and especially in the area of employment. The instruments that we've mentioned are the result of some of this work, but it's Guy Ryder's personal commitment and the commitment of his staff that has made this possible. And I would like to encourage you all the conference, to continue to provide them support in this particular area. And this is not just normative work, it's also practical work, as we have seen in many situations, working together in the field to pursue these objectives. The second is, this morning I had a very interesting meeting with the President of Ireland, whom you will listen to in a few minutes, and he brought up the question of silos and working together. Forced displacement, people on the move is a very broad question that requires collective responses, joined up responses. We in the UN are trying that through the UN reforms, through the work that we're doing around the compacts and so forth. I'd like to appeal to all of you, governments, business community, representative of workers. You also have to reach out. I wonder how many of you know what your colleagues meeting with me in my board are saying about these things. So we work together, you work together. That's the only way to face a global phenomenon of major proportions that needs urgent solutions. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you, to all the panel and all the delegates for this interesting discussion. And I would like to invite back to the floor the chair, the DJ, and Mrs. Dimitrova to close the session.
Thank you, Ms. Robino. Distinguished panelists, I now give the floor to Director General for his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, President. And Carolina, thank you for your expert management of what was a great panel. I'm sure everybody in the room will want to join with me in thanking our panelists for that excellent session. As has been emphasised, we are terribly short of time, and I'm sure had we had more time, we could have developed the conversation even more deeply. But I think it brought out some really crucial points for this discussion. And just a couple of reflections on my part. The first is I am really struck, and the conversation this morning has confirmed this feeling, how far and how quickly the debate on these issues have progressed in this organisation. I think when we started talking about these issues, under the pressure of events in the world, and not very pleasant events in the world, there was real doubt in the ILO, and I think colleagues and members of the governing body would confirm this, about whether the ILO becoming more deeply involved in these situations of conflict and fragility might not represent mission creep, might be taking us beyond our proper mandate, might be involving the ILO in doing the jobs that others in the international system are doing. I think we've overcome those doubts right now. I think we have understood, and here I want also to echo this notion of a change of, it's a horrible cliche, a change of paradigm, a change of approach to these issues in the international system. We stand very much at the ILO at the intersection between the humanitarian and the developmental responses to situations of conflict and crisis. And we have to occupy that space, not alone, but has been emphasized by many speakers in close partnership with others in the international system under the leadership of the Secretary General, but of course also with our member states. And in this House, I want to emphasize when we say member state, we mean not only governments, we mean also employers and workers. So I think the full discharge of our responsibilities at the ILO means that we do pick up and continue our work on jobs for peace and resilience through our flagship program. We have equipped ourselves with very important instruments. They've been mentioned, Recommendation 205, our guiding principles on refugee access to labour markets, and we move forward. And I think this has been, for me, the most fundamental message of today. The second is just a personal reflection. You know, when you listen to the testimonies we've heard today, is it any surprise? Should it come as a shock to anybody that in situations in which individuals, through whatever circumstance, find themselves displaced, find themselves cut off from the normality of everyday life, of which a working life is a fundamental part, should it surprise us, anybody who's unemployed feels fragile, anybody who's excluded from a labour market, we'll feel that individual fragility. And so all we're doing really in our discussion today is drawing that personal sort of conclusion and actually applying it to the collective circumstances in which we live. There is a lot at stake in this discussion. This is not a distraction from the ILO's normal business. This is not a pause from the main business of our conference. It is an integral and important part of the challenges and responsibilities of our organisation. To everybody who's been with us today, our panellists, all of you in the room, and it's still a full room, my thanks for your contribution to meeting those challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General. Before I suspend this sitting, I would like to thank all the participants, both on the podium and in the Assembly, for their important contributions to our discussion this morning. I would also like to thank Ms. Robino for her excellent moderation of this morning's discussions. Thank you again, Ms. Robino.